Hi, everyone. It's great to have you with us at Attention. I'm Marissa Kozlov, Vice President at Insider Intelligence, and I'm joined by Ethan Chernofsky, Senior Vice President of Marketing at Placer.ai. Today, we're going to discuss the latest in location analytics to help you understand how consumer behavior and retail performance is evolving. Ethan, it is so great to see you.
Chris, it's great to be doing this together. I'm really excited. This is a topic obviously you and I are both very interested in, but kind of to kick off, to give that framing of where our perspective comes from, we're a location data company. What that means very simply, people vote with their feet. We're showing you how they vote across the United States every single day to retail locations. We do that by observing a panel of tens of millions of devices, and we utilize AI and machine learning algorithms on top of that to make estimations on visits to retail locations. And we present that in a wealth of different reports within our platform. So on everything from visits, the customer journey, true trade areas, events, and a whole lot more. And that's kind of the perspective we bring to the table. And I think with that, we can dive into all the exciting things we've learned.
As we approach the end of the year, it's a good time to take stock, take a look back, but also think about what's to come in 2024. So let's kick this off with talking about the consumer. What characteristics really define the consumer in 2023, and which of these traits do you think will trickle into 2024?
Well, I think it's such an important kind of conversation and almost starting point, because obviously the consumers we're trying to reach. And I think, it impacts the messages that we're going to deliver, the channels we're going to deliver them through, when and where we want to reach the consumers with what messages. And I think the kind of core element of this last year has been this continuation of flexibility. So hybrid work, the idea that I don't have to go into the office every single day. What does that mean for where I am, how often I commute, what my mindset is when I want to shop and where, what it means for the way I interact with restaurants, the way I interact with grocery. And that has been like a really important piece of the puzzle. And what's interesting about that flexibility is there are signs that it's starting to look more like it did pre-pandemic. Now, clearly not all the way back, but we did see this extended period of kind of plateau when we looked at return to office. And that took a jump in the late spring. So May, June, July all saw this kind of 35% down compared to where we were pre-pandemic, as opposed to being 40% down for much of the start of the year. And that gives us this indication that there is at least some weight being given to the return to office. And that could have very interesting implications for retail next year. The other thing I think is really important is this kind of push to value. So we know the economic environment has been more challenging. And that doesn't mean that nobody has money to spend. It just means that there's a degree of uncertainty. And so things like the return of, spending for college loans, right? The return of certain degrees of uncertainty within an economic perspective are going to dictate how the consumer operates, and maybe the orientation towards dollar stores, towards off-price retail. And understanding those elements have been such a dominant factor this year. And while one seems like it's simplifying a little bit, the other doesn't seem like it's going anywhere, and that could have big impacts on how we see the consumer acting in the next year.
Well, it's really interesting. You bring back return to office. I'm definitely seeing a lot of the things you mentioned being here in New York City with many more people on the streets during the weekday. You also brought up the economy, and that's something that we really cannot ignore as being a huge factor in 2023 throughout the year. What does this tell us about where retail performance is headed for 2024?
So I think it speaks to the fact that there are retailers and retail segments that still have a built-in advantage. So off-price retail, dollar stores, even kind of grocery, QSR within the dining space, they have an advantage in the fact that they very much orient themselves towards the pursuit of value. But there are some caveats here. So one, things change very quickly. So we've seen this in other periods where the economy looks like it's rebounding. All of a sudden, we see kind of visits increase and visits kind of spread out in a way. The other element here is that there is this piece of understanding what the pursuit of value means. So value doesn't mean I'm looking for the cheapest product at all costs. It means I'm looking for a product that I feel like is fairly priced. And so when we think what that means for different segments of audiences, it can have very different implications for how retailers may want to operate. I think the big question is going to be the retailers that are well positioned in the short term, can they hold on to the gains? So if I wasn't necessarily going to Marshall's or Dollar General pre-pandemic, but now I am because I see the economic value, Have I been convinced during this period that they should remain part of my shopping mix? Because if I have, it could have very long-term implications.
And we know that it's not only about price for the consumer, as you said, it's also in some cases about the experience that someone has in store. In previous conversations that you and I have had, we've talked a lot about different examples of new experiences that are happening in retail locations. So what did we learn this year about the importance of retail experiences?
So I think we talk about experience a lot. And generally when we talk about experience, we think about kind of flashier versions of it. So, experiential displays and, Dick's Sporting Goods House of Sports and these very dedicated big time experiences. But the retail visit is an experience in and of itself. And I think the retailers that really lean into that are those that are the best positioned to succeed. So think about, Ulta in the beauty space, Sephora, others. Being there, trying something on, talking to the experts you have in store is part of the experience of visiting, and it's part of the value that the experience brings. When we think about off-price retail, the treasure hunt is something that we talk about as being a key part of the draw, even though, let's be clear, it's the antithesis of convenience, right? And when we say convenience is the most important thing, the treasure hunt is not convenient. It might be fun, it might be exciting, but it's not convenient. And so the understanding that the experience that we're providing is so key gives us a real sense of how consumers are interacting and why they're interacting so much with certain retailers. Even for someone like Target, just building in this element of there's ongoing discovery and constant new and being drawn into this wider journey. It's something that gives brands that really understand what their advantage is an ongoing element that they can bring to consumers.
Yeah. Consumers always remember someone or something that brought something extra to the table. I had a great experience this past weekend shopping for jeans. The store associate was so knowledgeable. She brought things to my attention I never would have thought to try on. And I'll remember that when I go back next time. And in regards to innovation at stores, it's not only about the experience, it's what else is happening that's new in these stores. We've seen a lot in innovation, but we've also seen some concepts that have failed to live up to the hype. What's on the roadmap for innovation in the near term for retailers from your perspective?
So I actually think that the kind of shining light of what's going to happen in retail and other segments, you actually get a view of it when you look at what's happening in a sector that is centered around innovation, which is the technology sector, especially startups. So this idea that you can chase this big vision that might be 10 years down the road from bringing value is becoming a more and more challenging prospect. Instead, I think we're looking more towards innovation that brings value tomorrow. So we're going to talk about retail media more in depth, but that is an innovation that brings lots of value. There are innovations like buy online, pick up in store, and the evolutions of buy online, pick up in store. So think Target giving you the ability to access Starbucks as part of the BOPIS order. That is kind of purposeful innovation, easy next steps, things that improve the supply chain, the accessibility of products, frontline workers, the guy in the store knowing what they have in stock, knowing what's available in the other store. These are elements that seem so obvious, and they're not the exciting kind of blockchain, metaverse, drones, flying cars, but they're the types of innovation that bring a lot of value. And the other piece of this is it's not all technology. Some of it is thinking about innovative ways to bring an offering to your consumers, so to your customers, excuse me. So we love looking at Starbucks because I think the way they utilize promotions and kind of these exciting new elements to their menu is brilliant, right? And it's not just kind of the pumpkin spice latte, which is obviously, kind of as if it was brought from the gods. But there is this willingness to try out different concepts that will bring people to try something when normally that wouldn't be on the top of their agenda. And the one that always pops for me is the tie-dye Frappuccino of years past. Like, was that their greatest drink ever? No. Did it help them bring a slight spike in a week that's normally a lull? Yes. And I think even when you think about like Maverick, convenience stores, the shift towards kind of this QSR-ish offering where you can come in and get high quality food, that makes sense innovation because it fits within the flow of what the consumer is looking for. And it's bringing them something that's delightful and going to keep driving visits over time.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not only about the technology, it's about what even a human could bring to the table. I was not aware of the tie-dye Frappuccino, but that would have been something that I would have liked to try and probably would have seen in the store and said, that looks pretty cool. So hopefully it comes back. So let's now talk about discovery. How is the focus on discovery specifically, or even a concept of reimagining a public space? How has this impacted physical retail's ongoing evolution?
We're really lucky to work with some very forward-looking shopping center owners and mall owners. It's the idea of shopping centers and mall spaces from a placemaking perspective is something that we were introduced to by these individuals. And the way they always talked about it is, I don't want you to just come shop in a store and leave. I want you to come shop in a store, grab a coffee, take out your computer, work for an hour, grab lunch. I want to have a space that you want to stay in for an extended period of time. And we've seen that focus in terms of how very many malls and shopping centers view this widening of who belongs within a retail space. More experiential, more experience-based kind of tenants, more food-based tenants, to give this wider holistic experience as opposed to just more and more apparel brands or more beauty brands. And I think that shift in focus is really important because it's aimed at providing this longer duration, and it's working. You can kind of see visit durations up at many malls consistently throughout this period, and especially when we see visits decline, even a small amount, we see visit durations increase. And I think there's something really powerful about that when you think about the opportunities you have to reach brands and to reach consumers and to create that connection. So if I know this is a place where you're going to spend an hour sitting and working on your computer and not just shopping for your next, Louis Vuitton bag, that's a different mindset. That's a different kind of mind space in order to bring messages to consumers and audiences that you want to reach, to have kind of pop-ups and experiences within malls that might create those engagements and relationships that will bring value over time. It's a new way of viewing, or not a new, but a more advanced way of viewing the visit, as it's not just about the expected transaction. It's about giving a longer and more robust experience.
It's almost like incorporating yourself into the workflow of that person on a daily basis, or in thinking about the few hours that person may have in that experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Ethan, you teased a little bit earlier that we were going to talk about retail media. So now is the time. There has been a lot of hype around this category for a while. What did we learn about its true potential this year?
So I think what we have seen is why there's so much excitement. And we have seen why we are seeing the early stages of its evolution. So we know that the idea of, hey, being able to bring a message within the store environment is not this shocking new concept. This has existed within kind of category management processes for a very long time. What is happening is a growing recognition by the retailers that there's something unique about this, that not only do they have this powerful opportunity because you're in a store, you have a high likelihood of making a purchase, you're in discovery mode. So I'm walking through the aisles of Target. The chance to convince me to buy something else is a lot higher than if I go on Amazon looking to buy a specific item. And this can be an embedded experience, and there's lessons that we can apply from the digital world. Because when we talk about retail media, we're talking about it within the brick and mortar environment. That we can take those online retail media lessons and apply them to the in-store experience. So how do we make engagements part of the shopping flow and not something that might be perceived as annoying or distracting? How do we make it something that supports discovery and therefore helps the journey? How do we make it something that keeps you in the physical environment while leveraging digital tools, which is a really interesting concept, because a lot of the work, we'll see like QR codes, but if I pull out my phone, you've lost me. I'm no longer in that enjoyable physical space. I'm doing something on my device. So I think there's so many interesting questions. And then the upside here, we talk about things like pop-ups and experiences, but those don't just belong in malls or shopping centers. They belong in the stores themselves. And I think the ideal examples are, look at the Walmarts and Targets of the world and the shop-in-shops at a Kohl's. And these ideas show that there is this next level to hit. And I think you and I have spoken about this before, but I mean, maybe the silliest but best is, look at Costco. Again, you walk by, the guy hands you a little cup of yogurt. Like, that's exciting. That's an experience. Even even though it's not like, is it the thing that you're going to go and write your next novel about? No, but it's something that's going to give you a nice positive interaction with a brand in a moment where you're like, that was a positive interaction. Maybe I want this in my fridge too.
Exactly. I don't think there's ever a time where we are not excited to get that little sample of yogurt or one pretzel or whatever it is. But it's a great experience. So I'm going to bring up some questions for you that focus around some current events from this past year, and let's talk about the implications around those.
Yeah.
The first was over the summer. So if you recall, the launches or the premieres, excuse me, of Barbie and Oppenheimer, which for many translated into Barbenheimer, because some people were spending 4 or 5 hours in the movie theater to see both of them. What are the wider lessons that we can be learned from these big blockbuster hits over the summer?
So I think the biggest lesson is we were all pretty convinced that movie theaters were going to die. There's no value. They don't bring anything to the table, right? That was the dominant narrative, and I'm oversimplifying. What this showed us is that if you have a great product, people will come. Barbie was a great film that had a great draw. It was expertly promoted, and it brought people to theaters. And what it tells us is that it's not, hey, we have seats and we have a big screen. It's what you're putting on the screen. And it's all about content and what content works in that environment and what content makes me want to get dressed up and go and be part of something wider. And I think what the biggest lesson is how expertly this was executed across as this kind of wider campaign where Barbie was everywhere. So it wasn't just a great movie. It was, it was great products in other stores and everything was turning pink. And I think it's this growing recognition of how advertising, product, and the kind of ability to sell something, even like a movie, all work together.
Absolutely. Well, I have to admit, I just saw the Barbie movie. I'm a few months late to the game, but that was the draw for me to go back to the theater, was really that experience. I had not been to an actual movie theater since before the pandemic. I brought my 9-year-old daughter. It was actually her first ever experience in the movie theater. So that was really interesting, I think, to go with her for her first experience, and then for me to go back after not having been there for quite a few years at this point. But it was a great time. Some other current events.
Even think about that, and I apologize for cutting you off, Marissa,
Yeah.
but think about, I went with my 11-year-old, and the big question when we were about a half an hour from getting into the car was her sprinting into my room and saying, do you have a pink shirt though? And so like that's the added value. It's not like the movie is great, and it is an amazing achievement. But the idea that it became such a thing that I have to go and change my wardrobe to be part of this experience, and that's when you know you're sitting on something really special.
Well, so I think our viewers may want to know, did you have a pink shirt?
Yeah, of course.
I would expect nothing less. And your daughter may be interested in Taylor Swift. I know my daughter is. There's still a lot of attention around Taylor Swift. Also, Lionel Messi. Their events, whether it was a sporting event or a concert, drove people to come even just to tailgate. People didn't even have tickets to their event. So what can we learn from this new behavior from consumers who aren't even going into the actual event, but just want to be around the event?
I think there's something so powerful in spaces that bring people together for something that they are emotionally connected to. And we've spoken about this in the past with like stadiums, but think about what we just saw with Taylor Swift. Beyond the fact that this summer tour, her and Beyonce packed stadiums across the country, it's the fact that for some of these Taylor Swift events, you have 30% of the people who showed up at the stadium never went inside the stadium. They just went to be part of the environment around it. That is someone operating at the height of their powers, but then it also asks, well, what were people doing in the parking lot? And I always think about this as a pretty big sports fan, when I go to a football game, what's going on in the parking lot? Because there's people who go just for that. Where are the food trucks? Where are the brand experiences? Where are the things that are targeted towards that audience? Because it is a significant, powerful, impactful audience. And recognizing that it's not just about the people who walk inside the stadium, it's about the people who experience it more broadly. I think that should open eyes for a lot of folks who are saying, wow, there's a big opportunity here to reach certain audiences, not just to reach them around something that they are emotionally connected to.
Yeah. And think about the amount of time that somebody is actually spending in that parking lot. It's not a few minutes, it's a few hours, if not the entire day for some people. So it's a great opportunity with a captive audience, as you were talking about.
Absolutely.
Let's go back to talking about shopping, and we'll talk a little bit about D2C. We know there's been some ups and downs with D2C over the past few years. What did we learn this year about limitations for D2C, but also where its power can head into next year?
So I think we have this tendency to kind of swing very far in different directions when we're kind of projecting into the future. So it's, direct to consumer is everything, owned retail is everything, goodbye ever having a wholesale contract again. And now what we're actually finding is that, look, owned retail has really significant values and really powerful opportunities to offer brands, right? So the Nike store is a great opportunity for Nike to create an experience that's going to connect you for life to the Nike ethos and the model, and it allows them to focus in a different way on what they accomplish in the store and bring other values to that visit. But there's other parts of the mix as well, and it doesn't dilute the value of their wholesale relationships when effectively utilized. And I think what we're finding in so many spaces, but direct to consumer is such a great example, is it's going to be balanced. There's going to be stores that these retailers own. I think like digitally natives, they're going to own some stores because it's a great way to reach their customers, because it's a great advertising component, because it offers them other values beyond just selling product. But they're going to look also for those traditional relationships because they're effective. And so I think this, it's always important to remind ourselves, because I feel like we went from retail apocalypse into pandemic into, oh my God, stores are the most important thing we've ever seen, to now realizing that it's always kind of fluctuating and somewhere in between. And every channel has a distinct value, and it's about how you utilize them in concert to bring the most impact to the consumer.
All right, well, good points right there about the D2C space. We cannot ignore that this year has been challenging for brands in particular, but there were definitely some tactics and campaigns that were especially powerful. So what are some success stories that you can share with us?
So I think it's when can you bring urgency and energy? So I have to go today and I'm excited to go, right? And I think it's about creating win-wins. And I feel like what we've learned from so many retailers, from so many shopping center and mall owners, is that these win-wins are really effective. So you think about, a brand like Shein doing pop-ups, right? They brought really significant increases in true trade areas. So brought a wider audience than would normally visit. We think about kind of the value that a Starbucks brings to a brand during the, holiday season. So we know, it's coming up. Black Friday is one of the best days for Starbucks visits. Why? Because when we're shopping, we need to get a coffee and refuel in the middle. And there is this ability to say, oh, come in and get a slight amount off. And then I'm going to increase my visits, but I'm going to extend the visit to that mall because you've gotten that refueling. So I think there's this capacity to think more widely about the values we bring and how that creates a win-win for the landlords, the retailers, and then ultimately for the consumer.
Wow, it's amazing to think Black Friday is just upon us in the next few weeks. What are your expectations for holiday this year?
It's a bad answer, but it's a necessary bad answer. I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because it's going to be very economic situation dependent. And as we discussed earlier, things can turn, and they can turn fast. And they can also plateau for the rest of the year. So there are retailers that I think are really well positioned. So off-price retail, it's really hard to see this environment changing so much that they don't do very well. I think the Walmarts and Targets of the world are really well positioned because they provide a ton of value, and they're really smart about extending the holiday season. So already in the kind of, I guess it's the early edge of the holiday season, but those October visits are obviously provide some really positive signs already. The question is going to be things like consumer electronics, home improvement, those areas that are a little bit more expensive. They've been more impacted by kind of the pull forward of demand, economic challenges. Their holiday season, I think, is more up in the air, and it's going to be very economic situation dependent.
That's a great point. I think I'm looking forward to holiday. I don't know about you. I'm sure that you are too. But there's going to be a lot to watch, and I think there's going to be a lot to look forward to based on all that great content that you shared for 2024. Thank you so much for being with us today, Ethan. It was so nice to see you again.
Thanks, Marissa. This was fun as always.
So hang on. Next up is our Ask the Analyst panel, featuring my colleagues Susie David Canyon, Jeremy Goldman, Evelyn Mitchell-Wolf, and Yori Wormser. They'll be taking your questions on trends and any developments for the new year, and also anything else you have in mind for them on marketing and advertising that you'd like to ask. Join them at 3 p.m. Eastern by clicking on the tab below for the video that says next session. Thank you all for joining us.